My place card at my husband's family dinner did not say Natalie Whitman. It said Natalie Hayes, the name I had not used since my wedding. At the head table beside my husband's chair, another card had already been set for my younger sister. Lily Hayes. My mother-in-law touched my wrist and said, "Let's not make this uncomfortable tonight." Then I saw the family photo order on the welcome table. Final copy approved 3 weeks ago. My name had not been misspelled. I had been moved out of the picture. I stayed where I was, and the air around me changed almost immediately. Margaret had expected me to pick up the card smile through the mistake and walk to table 5 like a woman who did not want trouble. Evan expected it too. I saw it when he looked over from the head table, and his jaw tightened for half a second. No guest in that room seemed to catch it, but I knew his face well enough to stop pretending this was a printer mistake. Oak Hollow Country Club had dressed the room beautifully. White roses lined the fireplace, gold lettering framed the anniversary sign, and a string quartet played near the windows while servers moved through the room with champagne. Evan's relatives were already there, along with his father's old law friends and a few women from Margaret's charity circle. The photographer kept checking the floral arch where Margaret and Richard Whitman were supposed to take their 40th anniversary portraits. Everything looked planned, which was exactly what made it feel wrong. Lily stood beside Evan in a pale green dress I had helped her pick out 2 months earlier. She had told me she needed something appropriate for family events, and I had teased her for finally buying something without sequins. She laughed then and asked if Evan would think the color was too soft. I remembered that question as she stood near my husband, her hands folded neatly in front of her, not looking at me yet. Margaret's fingers stayed on my wrist with light pressure. It looked affectionate from across the room, but it was not affection. "The printer used your maiden name," she said. "We'll fix it later." I looked down at the dark blue letters on the card, then back at her. Later than 3 weeks ago, her smile thinned and her hand finally dropped. The framed seating chart stood beside the guest book. I walked to it before Margaret could redirect me. The bottom corner read, "Final seating, approved by M. Whitman, printed 3 weeks ago." At the head table were Richard Whitman, Margaret Whitman, Evan Whitman, and Lily Hayes. My name had been moved to table 5 with 2 cousins from Ohio and a widow from Margaret's garden club who once called me the event girl at Thanksgiving. I planned events for a living, weddings, fundraisers, retirement dinners, memorial receptions. I knew a seating chart told the staff where to pour wine, but I also knew it told the room who belonged near whom. Margaret stepped beside me and said, "Natalie, it's just dinner." I kept my eyes on the chart. "No," I said, "it's seating." Evan was already walking toward us with Lily half a step behind him. She looked at the card in my hand before she looked at my face, and that told me she had seen it before. Evan kept his voice low and said there had been a mix-up. I asked if he meant my name, my table, or my sister in his seat. His eyes moved to Margaret too quickly for the word mix-up to survive. A waiter passed with champagne. Someone near the bar laughed. Then the photographer called out that immediate family should stay close for portraits, and Lily looked down at the carpet. I stepped to the welcome table and picked up the printed photo order clipped to a small board under the guest book. The first lines were ordinary. Richard and Margaret, Richard, Margaret, Evan. Then I saw the line that made the room go narrow around me, Evan and Lily family announcement portrait. Below it in smaller type was another line, Natalie optional after transition statement. My throat tightened because it all made sense too quickly. I set my place card on the welcome table, dark blue ink on thick cream paper, neat enough to make the lie look expensive. Evan leaned closer and said, "Please don't make this harder." I looked at him and asked, for who he opened his mouth, then shut it. Margaret said the evening was about Richard and her. I looked at the photo order in my hand and asked why I was on the schedule then. She had no answer ready, and for the first time that night, she looked annoyed instead of gracious. That was when I understood the dinner was not only an anniversary. It was a setup with flowers, champagne, a photographer, and a statement they expected me to read before dessert. I did not go to table 5. Evan tried to steer me toward the hallway, with one hand hovering near my elbow, careful not to touch me in front of guests. I stepped around him and walked back to the welcome table. He said, "Natalie, come on. 5 minutes." I said no, and his face twitched before he smoothed it back into concern. Margaret watched us from near the seating chart. She did not like my answer because my answer gave her no time to repair the room. Charlotte Mills, the Oak Hollow event coordinator, stood near the service door with a tablet and a headset. I had worked with her once at a charity luncheon. She was precise, quiet, and practical, the kind of coordinator who knew when a name change on a final proof had been approved by somebody. I walked straight to her and said I was scheduled to speak, so I needed the statement card. Charlotte looked at Margaret. Margaret gave the smallest nod, the kind people give staff when they want obedience without explanation. Charlotte went to a side station and came back with a cream envelope. She tried to hand it to Evan first, but he would not take it, so I took it myself. Inside was a printed statement card in the same dark blue ink as my place card. It thanked the guests for coming, then said Evan and I had been going through a private transition for some time. It asked everyone to offer grace, privacy, and continued love for everyone involved. I read that phrase twice because it did so much work. Lily became part of everyone involved. Evan got a clean exit. I got handed the speech. At the bottom corner was a cue note. 7:40 Natalie transition statement. 7:45 Evan response. 7:50 Lily joins head table for family dessert service. I looked up at Evan and asked when we separated. He rubbed one hand over his mouth and said this was not the place. I told him he picked the place. The night before, we had eaten pasta at our kitchen table. He asked whether I had called the landscaper, and I asked if he wanted coffee. He kissed my cheek before bed and left his socks by the hamper like he always did. None of that looked like a separation. It looked like a marriage being carried on normally until a different version was ready for guests. Margaret moved in quickly and said we could still handle this with dignity. I placed the statement card flat on the welcome table beside the photo order and told her she could start by telling the truth. A few guests were looking now. Margaret noticed, and her smile came back sharper. "People are watching," she said. I told her I knew, and that bothered her more than if I had raised my voice. The tech station sat behind a low partition near the back of the room. The anniversary slideshow was already loaded, and the screen above the floral arch showed a photo of Richard and Margaret on their wedding day. I walked toward it. The young tech looked up from the laptop with the startled face of a person realizing a private event was about to become his problem. Beside the laptop lay a printed cue list. Charlotte followed me and said she could not change the program without Margaret's approval. I told her I was not asking her to change it. I was asking her to show the schedule she was already going to run. She lowered her voice and reminded me that Margaret was the client and had signed the contract. I said I knew both things. Margaret had started across the room with Evan behind her, and Lily still sitting at the head table frozen with one hand near her necklace. I spoke quietly enough that Charlotte had to lean in. If she ran a false statement under my name, after I objected, she was not just coordinating dinner anymore. She was helping publish it. If the cue deck was clean, showing it protected Oak Hollow. If it was not clean, hiding, it protected Margaret. Charlotte swallowed and looked at the tech, then at the projector remote. I did not threaten her career. I did not need to. Event people know final copies matter, and they know a screen in a room full of guests is part of the record. When Margaret reached us and told Charlotte to step away from the equipment, I held up the statement card and asked her to say in front of Charlotte that she wanted Oak Hollow to run it under my name after I refused it. Margaret looked at the card then at Charlotte, then at the guests turning in their chairs. For half a second, she had nowhere to put her authority. Charlotte picked up the remote with an unsteady hand and whispered that Margaret was going to be furious. I told her Margaret already was. Charlotte looked once more at the screen and said the cue list was ready. Lily followed me into the short hallway outside the powder room before Margaret could pull the room back together. She did not say my name at first. She waited until the dining room noise dropped behind us as if privacy could still make this smaller. Up close, her dress looked new and more expensive than she could afford. Around her neck was a small pearl pendant I knew before my mind wanted to accept it. Evan gave me that necklace on our 3rd anniversary. I had not worn it in months, but it stayed in the little jewelry drawer beside our bed. I could picture the empty square in the velvet tray without going home. Lily touched the pendant when she saw me looking. I told her not to do that, and her hand dropped. I asked when he gave it to her. She glanced toward the dining room and said last month. When I asked if she knew it was mine, her mouth opened and closed without sound. I laughed once, and it came out ugly. She said Evan told her I did not wear it anymore. I asked if that was enough for her. Lily said Evan told her I was letting go. He said it had been over for a while. I told her we had dinner together the night before, that he slept in our bed, kissed me goodbye that morning, and asked me to pay the landscaper. She looked down, and I saw the truth land. She had not known everything, but she had known enough to be afraid of asking. I asked if she had seen the place cards before I arrived. Her shoulders tightened before she said yes. I asked if she had seen her name beside Evan's, and she said yes again. When I asked what he told her, she rubbed her thumb over the pearl and said Evan told her I knew enough. That was the phrase she had accepted because it gave her room to sit down. For years, Lily had been the person everyone handled carefully. The younger sister with bad timing, bad boyfriends, unpaid bills, and a gift for looking wounded after making a mess. I had made room for her in my apartment, my schedule, my holidays, and eventually, my marriage. Now, she stood in front of me wearing a piece of my bedroom and asking me not to ruin everything. She said she loved him. I nodded because I believed her, and that almost made it worse. Then I told her, love did not make this clean. From the dining room, Margaret's voice came through the microphone, thanking everyone for their patience and saying that before dessert, Natalie had graciously agreed to share a few words about family change and moving forward. It was early. Margaret had moved up the timing. Lily looked scared now and asked what I was going to do. She reached for the clasp of the necklace, but I told her to leave it on. She whispered my name, but I cut her off. They had put my name on a card, my seat on a chart, and my statement on a schedule. The necklace belonged to the same story. I left her in the hallway and returned to the dining room. Charlotte stood by the tech station with the remote in her hand. Margaret watched me from the microphone, and Evan stood near the head table with his jaw tight, already preparing the next version of himself. I nodded to Charlotte, and the wedding photo disappeared from the screen. A white slide filled the screen. Large black text appeared where Margaret's anniversary photo had been a second earlier. 7:40, Natalie transition statement. 7:45, Evan response. 7:50, Lily joins head table for family dessert service. 8:15, Evan and Lily, family announcement portrait. 8:30, full family photo, Natalie optional. The room tightened. A server stopped near the wall with a tray in both hands. The photographer lowered his camera, and Richard Whitman turned toward the screen slowly before looking at his wife. Margaret recovered first. She gave a short laugh and told the guests the cue list was an internal draft, one of dozens of versions that happen with large events. I picked up my place card from the podium and asked why this version had been printed. Then I held up the photo order and asked why that version was on the welcome table. Margaret's smile stayed in place, but the skin around her eyes changed. Evan stepped forward and said, "Natalie, stop. You knew things were bad. Don't stand there like this. Came out of nowhere." I told him we talked about the landscaper last night, not divorce, not my name, and not Lily in his chair. A cousin near the back whispered something, and someone else shushed her. Margaret turned to Charlotte and told her to turn it off. Charlotte raised the remote, but I looked at Margaret and said, if it was only a draft, nobody had anything to worry about. Charlotte's thumb stayed above the button. Margaret said my name like a warning and told the room I was upset. I agreed, then held up the statement card and reminded her she had scheduled the room. Evan moved closer and told me not to do this to Lily. I looked at the screen behind me and said Lily was already on it. At the head table, Lily lowered her eyes. I placed the statement card in front of Evan and told him to read it. He stared at the card, and when I told him to read the first line, his hand moved toward it and stopped. The guests saw it, and that mattered more than another speech. Margaret said this was cruel. I told her cruel was printing it. Then I took the microphone from the stand and stepped down from the small platform. I walked to the head table while the room stayed almost still. The photographer stood near the floral arch with his camera lowered but ready. I stopped behind Lily's chair and lowered the microphone slightly, keeping my eyes on the pearl pendant until the room followed my gaze. I said, if anyone was confused about the word transition, they should look at my sister's necklace. Lily's hand flew to her throat. I told them Evan gave it to me on our 3rd anniversary and that it had been in the jewelry drawer in our bedroom. Evan cut in and said, Natalie, stop. You're making this sound insane. I asked if he took it and if he gave it to her. He did not answer either question. Lily whispered his name. Evan snapped. Take it off, Lily. That did more damage than a denial would have because he did not deny anything. He tried to remove the evidence. Lily fumbled with the clasp until the pendant came loose, then held it in her palm and stared at it like it had changed shape. When she tried to hand it to me, I stepped back and told her no. I looked at Evan and said he could keep track of that one. The room did not need another speech. It needed one clear thing, so I picked up the place card from the podium and walked back to the head table. Natalie Hayes. Dark blue ink, raised letters, and the wrong life printed on good paper. I set it beside Lily's plate. She looked at the card, then at me, and without Margaret speaking for her, or Evan standing between us, she looked young and guilty at the same time. I told her to stand up. Margaret moved fast and said, No, Natalie, enough. I looked at her and told her she had printed enough. Evan said, Lily did not know everything. I said Lily had seen my card. Then I asked her in front of the room if she saw it before I arrived. Lily nodded, but I made her say it. She said yes. I asked if she saw her name next to Evan's. She said yes again, this time barely above a whisper. Evan muttered, Jesus, Natalie. I looked at him and said he wanted witnesses. Richard stood, then his face gone gray. He did not save me. The screen, the card, and Lily's own answers had already done that. He looked at Margaret, then at Evan, and said the chair was never Lily's. Margaret's mouth tightened, and for a moment she looked more angry at being cornered than ashamed of what had happened. Lily stood. Her napkin slid from her lap and fell beside the chair, but she did not pick it up. She stepped back, still holding the necklace in her fist. No one clapped or gasped. People just watched the room rearrange itself. Margaret said the anniversary had been ruined. Richard turned toward her and said her name once quietly, and that shut her mouth for the first time all night. Evan picked up the statement card and started to fold it. I took it from his hand before the crease set and said he did not get to clean it up that way. Charlotte brought a folder from the text station. I placed the statement, the photo order, the cue list, and my place card inside. My hands were steady by then, which surprised me. I told the room there would be no statement from me, no announcement portrait, and no family photo where I appeared after being removed from the family table. Margaret started to speak, but I kept going and told anyone who had heard that Evan and I agreed to this before I arrived that the story was false. The photographer took one picture. Just one. I heard the shudder, and so did everyone else. Evan turned toward him and told him to delete it. The photographer hesitated until Richard said, "Don't." Evan looked at his father like he had been slapped. I walked to table 5, picked up the folded napkin from the place I had never used, and set it back down. The widow from the garden club reached for my hand as I passed. She did not say anything. She squeezed once and let go. At the door, Margaret said people would talk. I looked back at the room where guests were already whispering. Charlotte was still holding the remote, and Lily stood away from the head table with the necklace closed in her fist. I left before Margaret found another polite word for what they had done. The hallway outside the dining room was colder than the room. I stood near the coat room and held the folder against my ribs, while my hands started shaking where nobody needed me to look composed. Charlotte came out first and handed me a slim envelope. It had printed copies of the Q-list photo order seating chart and statement. Her voice was low when she said Margaret was going to blame her. I told her Margaret had already tried. Charlotte looked back at the dining room doors and said she should have asked more questions when she saw the name change. I did not know what to do with that, so I only nodded. Evan came out next. His tie was loose, and the clean, lawyerly calm he wore in public had cracked. He said I did not have to do it like that. I asked what part. He looked toward the dining room and said, "The necklace, the screen." Making Lily answer like that, I told him his mother printed my old name. He scheduled me to read a lie, and he put my sister beside him for a portrait. He rubbed both hands over his face and said he had been trying to keep things from getting ugly. I told him it was ugly before I walked in. His phone buzzed, but he ignored it. Lily came into the hall with the pearl necklace in her fist. Her mascara had smudged at one corner, though she had not cried enough to earn the mess. She said she was sorry. I looked at her until she swallowed and said she should have asked me. I told her yes. Then she said she wanted him to be telling the truth, and I told her I knew. She opened her hand and held out the necklace. I did not take it. She said it was mine, and I told her it was not anymore. That hit her, and I saw it, but I let it hit. Some pain belongs to the person who helped make it. Margaret came out last. She was still upright, still dressed perfectly still, trying to make the hallway feel like her room. She said I had no right to involve guests in a family matter. I reminded her that she put programs at every plate. She said that was different. I asked how. She had no answer that could survive being said out loud. Richard appeared behind her looking tired in a way I had never seen. He told Margaret to let me leave. She snapped Richard, "Not now." He said, "Yes, now." That ended it. At the front desk, the club attendant handed me my keys and said, "Have a good evening, Mrs. Whitman." She probably had no idea what had happened inside, and the normalness of it almost got me. Outside, the air smelled like rain on warm pavement. I sat in my car for a minute before starting the engine. My phone kept lighting up with Evan Lily, an unknown number, then Evan again. When my mother called, I answered. She heard my voice and asked where I was. I looked at the envelope on the passenger seat and told her Oak Hollow. She asked what happened, and I pressed my fingers against my eyes. I told her I was coming over. She did not ask for the story. She said she would unlock the door. My mother was waiting in the kitchen when I arrived, wearing a robe slippers and her hair pinned badly. She took one look at my face and put a mug on the counter without asking what I wanted. I opened the folder on her table and laid out the seating chart, the photo order, the cue list, the statement, and my place card. She read every page. When she got to Natalie optional after transition statement, she took off her glasses and set them beside the papers. She asked if Lily had seen it. I said yes. She asked if Evan had seen it. I said yes again. She looked toward the window over the sink and stayed quiet for a while. That silence felt better than being questioned. By noon, I had written the email. It went to the guests who had been present, the family members on the dinner list, and the people who had received the anniversary program. I read it out loud to my mother. I wrote that I had not approved the transition statement prepared for the Whitman anniversary dinner, that Evan and I had not agreed to a separation announcement before the event, and that no one had permission to use my married or maiden name in any public or family statement without my written consent. I attached the seating chart, photo order, cue list, and statement card. My mother asked if I was sure. I told her they had used those people to sell the lie. She said to send it. I removed one angry sentence, then clicked send. Margaret called 9 minutes later, and I put her on speaker. Margaret told me to retract the email. Her voice was controlled, but barely. I told her no. She said I was doing permanent damage. I said I had attached the documents she approved. She told me I had no idea what I was doing. I said I knew exactly what I was correcting. When she said I could have handled it privately, I reminded her she had scheduled it publicly. She went quiet, then said I sounded proud of myself. I looked at my mother, who had both hands around her mug and murder in her eyes, and said I sounded awake. Margaret hung up. An hour later, Evan showed up at my mother's house in the same suit without the tie and without flowers. He looked like he had spent the morning making calls and losing them. I opened the front door and left the screen locked. He said I had sent it to everyone. I told him I sent it to the people he tried to use as witnesses. His phone buzzed while he was still staring at me. He checked it without thinking, and the color left his face slowly. When I asked what happened, he said nothing, but he had never been good at lying in doorways. The real estate partnership he had been chasing for months had pulled out. I did not see the message, but he said enough by accident, judgment, discretion, reputational exposure. Those were expensive words. He asked if I was happy. I said no. He said I looked calm. I told him that was not the same thing. Then he leaned closer to the screen and said his mother had been removed from the spring benefit. I said nothing. He said she was blaming me. Before I could stop myself, I told him she should try the printer. Behind me, my mother made a small sound, almost a laugh, and almost not. Later that evening, Lily texted. The first message was long and messy. Then another came, then another. She said she had seen the card and knew it was wrong. She said she asked Evan because she wanted him to make it okay. She said she let me become the problem because that was easier than admitting she was sitting in a place that still belonged to me. I did not answer. My mother called her from the porch. I heard only pieces through the screen door. No, Lily. A pause. You don't get to cry first. Another pause. You saw the card. When my mother came back inside, she looked 10 years older. She said Lily wanted to believe him. I nodded, and my mother sat down across from me. Wanting doesn't clean it up, she said. That night, Evan came back. This time, he did not mention the deal, his mother, or Lily. He stood outside the screen door and said he had put my name under something I never agreed to. It was the first apology that actually named the thing. I waited until he said he was sorry. I believed he meant it in that moment, but one honest sentence could not undo a room full of planning. When he asked if I was coming home, I looked past him at the porch light at my mother's small yard and at the folder still sitting on the hall table. I told him not tonight. He nodded like he understood. Maybe he did, or maybe he was only tired. I shut the inside door. The next afternoon, I drove to my office. It was a small room above a stationery shop with a narrow staircase and windows facing the back of a bakery. Nothing about it looked like the Whitmans, and that helped. On my desk sat a box of blank place cards from a wedding I had finished the weekend before. Thick ivory paper, clean edges, no names yet. For 6 years, I had written other people's names carefully. Mothers who wanted new husbands kept far from old ones. Fathers who refused to sit near each other. Brides who cried because a dead parent still needed a place in the room somehow. I knew names mattered. I had just forgotten mine did too. I took one card from the box, uncapped a pen, and wrote one word, Natalie. I set the card against my monitor and answered 2 client emails. One bride wanted to know whether divorced parents should be seated at separate tables for the rehearsal dinner. I typed, ask yourself whether you're keeping peace or hiding a problem someone else created. Then I deleted it and wrote something simpler. Separate tables may be best if sitting together would put pressure on the wrong person. Later, Lily sent another message. It was shorter this time. I saw your card before you came in. I should have stood up then. I read it twice and put the phone face down. Some messages do not need an answer the same day. That evening, I stopped by the house Evan and I had shared. He was not there. The kitchen looked normal, which felt insulting. 2 mugs sat in the sink. Mail was stacked on the counter, and Margaret's anniversary vase stood in the center of the table. I went upstairs and opened the small jewelry drawer. The empty place where the pearl necklace had been looked larger than the necklace ever had. I packed 2 bags. Before I left, I put 1 blank place card on the kitchen table and wrote slowly so the ink would not smear, "Do not use my name again." Then I locked the door. The Oak Hollow place card stayed in my coat pocket until I reached the trash can outside my office. Natalie Hayes' dark blue ink raised letters. I dropped it in and went upstairs. The next morning, I printed place cards for a client's dinner. I checked every name twice, stacked them in order, and packed them into a white box. Then, I moved on to the next table.